Imagine the sound of your life savings being washed away in the middle of a Tuesday night. I'm standing in my living room in a high-end neighborhood in North Carolina, staring through the floor-to-ceiling glass at what used to be a $15,000 manicured lawn. Now, it's a swirling, muddy, dark abyss. The HOA's failed drainage system from the uphill park had finally given way, and every single gallon of runoff was funneling directly into my property. It wasn't just a puddle. It was a 4-foot deep lake that was currently seeping into my crawlspace and rotting the wooden frame of my home. My heart was racing, but not with fear. It was racing with a cold, calculated fury. I knew exactly who was responsible. I had sent 24 emails to the board president, a man we'll call Richard, over the last 6 months. I told him the pipes were clogged. I told him the retaining wall was leaning. His response: he told me I was being hysterical, and that I should focus on the aesthetic harmony of my flower beds instead of worrying about civil engineering. While I was standing there trying to figure out how to stop the water from reaching my electrical panel, I saw a flashlight flickering outside. It was Richard. He wasn't there to help. He wasn't there with a pump or a sandbag. He was holding a clipboard and a digital camera. He walked as close as he could to the water's edge, snapped a photo of my submerged patio furniture, and walked back to his dry, uphill driveway. 10 minutes later, I got an automated notification on my phone. The HOA had issued me a $250 fine for maintaining an unsanitary water feature and breeding mosquitoes. They had literally turned my home into a disaster zone, and then had the absolute audacity to fine me for the disaster they created. That was the moment the nice neighbor died. That was the moment I decided that Richard wouldn't just pay for the repairs. He would pay with his reputation, his position, and every ounce of peace he had in that neighborhood. I didn't call him to argue. I didn't go outside to scream. I sat down at my kitchen table, which was now vibrating from the pressure of the water against the foundation, and I started a spreadsheet. I labeled it Project Nightmare. I spent the next 4 hours while the water rose, documenting every single interaction I had ever had with this man. I pulled up the Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, the CC and RS that every homeowner has to sign. I didn't just read them, I memorized them. I found Section 4.2, the association shall be responsible for the maintenance and repair of all common area drainage systems. Then I found the gold: failure to maintain common areas that results in damage to private property shall be considered a breach of fiduciary duty. Richard thought those rules were a leash to keep homeowners in line. He didn't realize they were a noose I was about to tighten around the board's neck. By daybreak, the lake had settled. My backyard looked like a war zone. Silt, mud, and literal trash from the community park were buried in my grass. I took a photo of the orange $250 fine notice sitting on my counter next to the photo of the flood. I sent one final text to Richard. The water has reached the foundation. Are you going to send a crew, or should I proceed with my own solution? His reply was the nail in his coffin. The board has determined this is a private grading issue. Any unauthorized work on the common area pipes will result in further fines. Pay the $250 by Friday. I smiled. It was the most expensive text message he would ever send. I didn't hire a local lawyer. I hired a specialist from the city who handled gross negligence cases against developers. We spent 3 days doing a deep dive into the county records. What we found was a level of corruption that made my blood boil. 5 years ago, the HOA had received a $50,000 insurance payout to upgrade the very drainage pipe that flooded my yard. But when we looked at the financial audits, that money was never spent on pipes. Instead, the board had voted to use it to re-landscape the entrance of the neighborhood and install a heated pool for the community center, the same pool Richard and his friends used every single day. They had literally embezzled infrastructure funds to pay for their own luxury, knowing that the next big storm would drown my house. This wasn't a grading issue. This was a crime. I spent the next 2 weeks playing the victim perfectly. I let them send me 2 more fines. I let the total reach $750. I wanted them to feel confident. I wanted them to think I was a broken man who was too poor or too scared to fight back. Meanwhile, my lawyer was filing a $100,000 lawsuit in the county superior court. We weren't just suing for the yard. We were suing for triple damages due to willful and wanton negligence. I also filed a lease pendens on the HOA's common property, which effectively froze their ability to sell any assets or take out any loans. The day of the monthly HOA meeting was a humid Georgia evening. The community room was packed with neighbors who were also being bullied. Richard stood at the podium looking like a king, talking about a new rule that would ban non-traditional front door colors. I waited until he asked if there were any new business items. I stood up, walked to the front, and handed him a folder. He laughed, thinking it was a check for the fines. He opened it, and his face turned the color of ash. It wasn't a check. It was a copy of the 2021 insurance payout audit and the summons for the lawsuit. I didn't say a word. I turned around and walked out of the room. Behind me, I could hear the other neighbors starting to murmur as the realization hit them. The board had stolen their infrastructure money. The next 6 months were a slow-motion execution. Richard tried to use the HOA's legal fund to fight me, but because we had sued him personally for fraud and embezzlement of the insurance money, the HOA's insurance company refused to pay for his lawyer. He had to spend his own money. He had to hire a defense attorney at $400 an hour to explain why he spent drainage money on a heated pool. I watched from my porch as for sale signs started going up in the neighborhood, but no one was buying. The neighborhood was under litigation, and no bank would issue a mortgage for a house in a community with a frozen legal status. The neighbors turned on him. People who used to have drinks with him were now shouting at him when he walked his dog. In the end, it never even went to trial. Richard's own lawyer told him that if he stepped into a courtroom, he would likely leave in handcuffs for the insurance fraud. They settled for the full $100,000. I used that money to build a backyard that is a masterpiece of engineering. I have a retaining wall that could stop a tsunami and a drainage system that is better than the city. But the best part wasn't the money. The best part was the mandatory resignation clause in the settlement. Richard and the entire board were forced to step down and were barred from ever serving on a homeowners association again. I turned their life into a nightmare because they thought they could profit from my disaster. They thought a $250 fine would break me. Instead, it gave me the fuel to burn their empire down. Now when it rains, I sit on my patio, sipping a coffee, and I watch the water flow perfectly into the drains. And across the street, I see Richard, who had to downsize his house to pay his legal fees, staring at my beautiful, dry yard. He thought he owned the neighborhood. He found out the hard way that he only owned a sinking ship.